There's a recipe out there, an invisible manual that parents follow without even knowing it, a precise set of ingredients that, when combined in the right order, effectively manufacture a narcissist. And I'm not talking about a metaphor. Carl Jung discovered that narcissism isn't some random occurrence. It doesn't just spring into existence. No, it's manufactured, produced on an assembly line. And most parents unknowingly follow this recipe, repeating exactly what was done to them. If you grew up feeling like you were never good enough, like you had to perform to earn love, like you had to hide who you really were to be accepted, then you are likely a product of this recipe. And if you're a parent yourself, you might be following that same manual right now, without the slightest clue. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal the exact ingredients of this formula, the precise steps that transform an innocent child into someone displaying narcissistic traits. And more importantly, how to recognize if you're repeating this cycle yourself, because the only way to break a recipe is to first know exactly what it contains. The pain you carry might have a name you've never even heard before. Jung called it a primary narcissistic wound. But before we talk about that, I need you to understand something that will completely change how you see your parents, your childhood, and most importantly, yourself. When we talk about narcissism, most people picture parents who are obviously abusive, parents who yell, who hit, who openly humiliate. But Jung discovered something far more disturbing. The most deeply wounded narcissists often come from families that, on the outside, appear perfectly normal. Parents who never raised their voices, who provided everything materially, who even seemed loving. So how do seemingly good parents manufacture narcissists? The answer lies in the unconscious nature of this transmission. Parents don't have to be malicious to psychologically damage a child. They just need to be unconscious, possessed by their own unresolved complexes, and these complexes operate like computer programs running in the background. The parent doesn't choose to invalidate their child's emotion. The autonomous complex within them does it automatically. Because that's how they were programmed in their own childhood. This isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. And explanation is the first step toward breaking the cycle. I'm going to show you the 5 main ingredients of the recipe right now. The 5 elements that, when combined, manufacture a narcissistic personality structure. Remember these, because you're going to recognize several of them from your own story. Ingredient number 1, systematic conditional love. Every child is born with a fundamental need. It's not food, it's not shelter, it's to be seen, to be recognized as a separate being with intrinsic value, regardless of what they do or don't do. Jung called this the need for mirroring. The child looks to their parents and needs to see a reflection that they exist, that they matter, that they are loved simply for being. But in the recipe for narcissism, this mirroring comes with conditions. The child isn't loved for who they are. They're loved for what they do, for what they represent, for what they achieve. The message, never spoken in words, but transmitted through 1,000 micro-expressions, is, you only have value when you please me. You only deserve love when you perform correctly. Your being isn't enough. Your doing is what counts. Emily was 4 years old when she drew for the first time. She ran to her mom with the paper in her hands, her eyes shining with pride. Her mom glanced up from her phone, smiled mechanically, and said, "That's nice, honey, but you need to color inside the lines. Maybe try to do better next time." Seems harmless, constructive criticism. Jung would argue that at that moment, something died inside Emily. Not the drawing, no, but her spontaneity, her ability to create for the sheer joy of creating. The message she received was, your authentic expression isn't enough. It needs to be improved, adjusted, corrected, and Emily learned, like every child learns. She stopped drawing for pleasure. She started drawing for approval, and over time she completely forgot that she had ever drawn simply because she wanted to. That's systematic conditional love. It's not obvious abuse. It's invisible erosion. The child doesn't know how to name what's happening. They just feel that they need to be different than they are to deserve love. And that feeling becomes the foundation of their entire psychic structure. The result: a lifetime spent seeking external validation, because inside there's no one there to validate. The true self has been replaced by a performance. Ingredient number 2, chronic emotional invalidation. Emotions are the language of the self. When a child cries, they're communicating something essential about their internal experience. When they laugh, when they're afraid, when they feel angry, they're expressing who they are in that moment. In the recipe for narcissism, these emotions are systematically invalidated. It's not that the parents say, "Stop crying" once. It's that they say it 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. "You're exaggerating. It's not that bad. Stop being so dramatic. Just swallow it. There's no reason to cry." The child receives the message repeatedly. Your internal reality is wrong. What you feel isn't real. What you feel doesn't matter. What you feel is inconvenient for me. And here's the terrible paradox. The child can't simply stop feeling. Emotions don't disappear because they're invalidated. They go into the unconscious, into what Jung called the shadow. And from there, they continue operating. But now, without name, without form, without possibility of integration. Ethan was 6 years old when his dog died. He cried all night. His dad came into his room and said, "Boys, don't cry. Swallow it and go to sleep. You won't even remember tomorrow." Ethan swallowed it, like every child swallows it. He stopped crying in front of his dad. But something broke that night. The connection between what he felt and the permission to express what he felt was severed. And Ethan learned that to be loved, to be accepted, to be a man, he needed to not feel, or at least pretend he didn't. 30 years later, Ethan can't cry even at funerals. He can't say, "I love you" to his wife without it sounding mechanical. He can't connect emotionally with his own children, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't remember that night. He doesn't remember the message, but the message is there, operating in the background, controlling everything. That's chronic emotional invalidation. And it's the second ingredient in the recipe. Hold on, because now comes the most important part. The third ingredient is what connects everything. Ingredient number 3, suppression of authentic identity. Children are born with a true self, an essence, natural preferences, organic inclinations, a unique way of being. Some are introverted, others extroverted. Some are artistic, others analytical. Some are sensitive, others more resilient. In the recipe for narcissism, that essence is treated as a problem. The introverted child is forced to be social. The sensitive child is taught to toughen up. The artistic child is steered toward practical pursuits. The constant message is this: who you are naturally isn't good enough. You need to be different. You need to be who I need you to be. Carl Jung called this the murder of the true self. It's not physical murder. It's psychological murder. The child doesn't die on the outside. They die on the inside. What was authentic goes into the shadow, and in its place arises what Jung called the persona, a mask, a character, a fabricated version of themselves that exists only to please, to perform, to survive. Abigail was always sensitive. She felt the emotions of people around her as if they were her own. She absorbed her mother's sadness, her father's anger, her brother's anxiety. She was a walking emotional radar. But in Abigail's family, sensitivity was weakness. "Stop being so dramatic," they'd say. "You're too sensitive. Get a thicker skin. That's just being whiny." And Abigail learned. She built an armor. She shut down the radar. She disconnected from her own sensitivity because sensitivity meant rejection. At 32 years old, Abigail works as a successful executive. She's considered cold, calculating, efficient. No one imagines that beneath the armor exists a little girl who just wanted to feel without being shamed for it. The sensitivity didn't die. It went into the shadow. And from there, it controls Abigail in ways she doesn't understand. Relationships that never work because she can't open up. Decisions made from the head because the heart was shut down decades ago. A life spent performing a character she never wanted to be. This is suppression of authentic identity, and it's perhaps the most destructive ingredient in the recipe. Because when you kill a child's true self, you don't transform them into nobody. You transform them into someone who doesn't exist. A ghost wearing people clothes. Remember when I said that parents don't choose to follow this recipe, that they're possessed by autonomous complexes? Here's the proof. Emily's mother, the one who criticized the drawing, also had her drawings criticized when she was a child. Ethan's father, who told him to swallow his tears, was also told to swallow his tears by his own father, Abigail's family, who shamed her sensitivity. Was itself a family where sensitivity had been forbidden for generations. Complexes are transmitted, not genetically, psychically, through what Jung called participation mystique. The child absorbs the unresolved complexes of their parents as if they were their own, and when they grow up and have children, they pass on exactly what they received. Not because they want to, because they don't know how to do it differently. The recipe perpetuates. From generation to generation, an entire lineage of murdered true selves, replaced by personas, passing on the same destruction they received. But we're not done yet. There are two more essential ingredients, and the fourth will show you something about your parents that maybe you've never realized. Ingredient number 4, parental shadow projection. Jung taught that we all have a shadow, the part of ourselves that we don't accept, that we repress, that we hide even from ourselves. But the shadow doesn't disappear because it's denied. It projects outward, onto other people, and frequently, onto our children. The father who doesn't accept his own weakness will fiercely attack any sign of weakness in his son. The mother who doesn't accept her own anger will disproportionately punish any expression of anger in her daughter. What bothers us in our children is often what we can't stand in ourselves. Michael grew up hearing that he was selfish. His mother repeated it constantly. "You only think about yourself. You're incapable of thinking about others. You're the most selfish person I know." Michael internalized it. He believed it. He spent his entire life trying to prove that he wasn't selfish, giving himself away excessively, annulling himself in relationships, putting everyone's needs above his until there was nothing left of himself. But here's the truth that no one told Michael. His mother was the selfish person, not him. She couldn't accept her own selfishness, so she projected it onto Michael. She attacked in him what she couldn't bear to see in herself. And Michael spent 35 years carrying a shadow that wasn't even his. This is parental shadow projection. The child becomes a deposit for the unconscious contents that the parents can't integrate. And because children don't have formed psychological defenses, they absorb everything. They believe that it's true about themselves. They build an entire identity based on lies that the parents told about them in order to avoid having to confront their own shadow. The fifth ingredient is what seals everything: what makes the recipe practically irreversible if it's not consciously confronted. Ingredient number 5, absence of repair. Up until now, you might be thinking, but all parents make mistakes. All parents invalidate emotions sometimes. All parents project at some point. This is true. The difference between a childhood that wounds and a childhood that destroys lies in the repair. When a parent makes a mistake and then acknowledges the mistake, apologizes, repairs the connection, the child learns something fundamental. Mistakes happen, but connection can be restored. This creates what psychologists call secure attachment. The child knows that even when something goes wrong, the love is still there. They can trust. But in the recipe for narcissism, repair doesn't exist. The father never apologizes. The mother never acknowledges that she was wrong. The mistake is denied, minimized, or worse, turned against the child. You're just too sensitive. You misunderstood. I never said that. And the child learns another lesson. A much more destructive one. When something goes wrong, it's my fault. There is no repair, there is no safety. I am alone. Jessica never heard an apology from her parents, not once in 40 years. When she tried to talk about something that hurt her, she was immediately silenced. We did everything for you. You should be grateful. Stop making things up. And Jessica learned that her perceptions were false, that her memory was faulty, that if she felt pain, it was her fault for feeling it, not theirs for causing it. At 40 years old, Jessica doesn't trust her own perception. She questions every feeling. She doubts every memory. She lets people treat her badly because she doesn't trust her own judgment that she's being mistreated. This is absence of repair, the final ingredient, the one that seals the recipe and makes the wound chronic. Now you know the 5 ingredients: systematic, conditional love, chronic emotional invalidation, suppression of authentic identity, parental shadow projection, absence of repair, combined in just the right doses over years and years. These ingredients manufacture a narcissistic personality structure. It's not because the child was born that way, but because they were systematically molded to become that way. And here's what Carl Jung understood better than anyone else. Narcissism isn't an excess of self-love. It's the absence of a true self. The narcissist doesn't love themselves too much. They don't have a real self to love. They only have an inflated persona, trying to compensate for the emptiness where the true self should be. The grandiosity is a defense against collapse. The constant need for validation is a desperate attempt to fill a hole that no external validation can ever fill. The lack of empathy is a consequence of having their own empathy murdered in childhood. But hold on, because the most important part is still to come. If you've recognized these ingredients in your own story, you need to know what to do now. The first thing you need to understand is that recognizing the recipe isn't the same as healing from it. Many people spend years in therapy, deconstructing their childhood, naming every ingredient, pointing out every flaw in their parents, and yet they remain trapped in the same patterns. Why? Because intellectual knowledge isn't transformation. Carl Jung was very clear about this. You can know everything about your complexes and still be completely dominated by them. Insight alone doesn't liberate. What liberates is integration, and integration is a visceral process, not just a mental one. Let me show you what this means in practice. Emily, the one from the drawing, spent 10 years in therapy. She knew exactly where her need for approval came from. She could explain in detail how her mother had conditioned her love. She even resented her mother for it. But she continued living the same way. still drawing for approval, even if now it was the approval of the therapist, of her husband, of her children. She still couldn't create anything without immediately asking if it was good. The pattern had been named, but not transformed. One day, Emily did something different. She was alone at home with a piece of paper in front of her, and instead of drawing something that she could show to someone, she decided to draw something that no one would ever see, something just for her. At first, she couldn't. Her hand froze. Her mind said, "But what's the point if no one's going to see it?" That's exactly the complex speaking, the voice of her mother, saying that expression only has value if it's validated by another. Emily took a breath, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 40 years, she let her hand move without objective, without judgment, without expecting approval. What came out on the paper doesn't matter. What matters is what happened inside her. For a few minutes, the complex lost control. The true self, the one that died at 4 years old, breathed again. That's integration. It's not knowing that you have a pattern. It's acting differently, despite the pattern, repeatedly, until the new begins to be stronger than the old. Ethan, the one who was told to swallow his tears, had a similar moment. At 42 years old, after 2 decades of a distant marriage, of children he barely knew emotionally, of a lifetime of coldness, he was in the hospital, visiting his dying father. His father was unconscious, probably wasn't going to wake up again. And Ethan, sitting next to the bed, felt something rising, something he hadn't felt in more than 30 years. The complex screamed, "Swallow it down. Men don't cry. You'll look weak." But this time, Ethan didn't swallow. He let the tears come. He cried softly at first, then openly. He cried for his father. He cried for himself. He cried for the 6-year-old whose connection to his own emotions was severed that night. His father never knew. He died 2 days later without waking up. But something changed in Ethan. In that hospital room, a door that had been locked for decades opened a little bit. In the following months, Ethan started to cry more. In movies first, which was safer. Then in conversations. Then in front of his wife. Every time he cried, the complex screamed. And every time he cried anyway, the complex lost a little bit of power. Today, 5 years later, Ethan can say, "I love you" to his wife, without it sounding mechanical. He can hug his children without rigidity. He hasn't transformed into another person. He's transformed into who he always was, before he was told to swallow his tears. Barbara, the executive who killed her sensitivity, had her turning point in a business meeting. An employee was being fired. She watched professionally, as always. But something happened that day. She saw the man's eyes. She saw the fear, the shame, the pain of losing his job and having to tell his family. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt, not thought, felt. The radar that she had turned off at 12 years old turned on for a second, and it was unbearable. Barbara needed to leave the room. She went to the bathroom and vomited, not out of disgust, but out of emotional overload. Decades of repressed emotions, wanting to come out all at once. She could have ignored it. She could have attributed it to something she ate. But Barbara, for some reason, paid attention, understood that this was a sign of something bigger. She started therapy the following week. Not the generic therapy she had done before. Therapy focused on reconnecting with the feeling function that had been amputated in childhood. A slow process, painful, scary. 3 years later, Barbara still works as an executive. She's still competent and efficient, but now she can feel, she can cry, she can connect. The armor is still there, but it has cracks. And through the cracks, the sensitive girl who was shamed breathes from time to time. Have you noticed the pattern? Emily, Ethan, Barbara, none of them healed by knowing about the recipe. They healed by acting differently, despite the recipe, consciously choosing, one time at a time, not to obey the complex. This is what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, separating yourself from the false identifications that were imposed in childhood. It's not easy, it's not fast, and it's scary, because it means confronting everything you've used to survive until now. But it's the only way to break the cycle. Now I need to talk about something delicate. You may have watched this entire video thinking about your parents, about what they did to you, about the ingredients they put into your formation. And that's valid, it's important. Recognizing the wound is the first step. But there's a more difficult question, a question you might not want to answer. If you have children, how many of these ingredients are you using with them? This isn't an accusation, it's the most uncomfortable truth about the generational transmission of trauma. Most parents who follow the recipe were themselves products of it, and they follow it, not out of malice but out of unconsciousness. You might have sworn you'd never be like your parents, and yet, in moments of stress, of exhaustion, of frustration, you hear your own voice saying exactly what was said to you. Stop crying. You're exaggerating. Why can't you be more like your brother or sister? The complex speaks through you, without your permission, automatically. Because that's how you were programmed. The only way to stop the cycle is brutal, honest, self-awareness, observing your own patterns without defensiveness, recognizing when you're repeating and choosing one interaction at a time to do it differently, one interaction at a time, one choice at a time. That's how generational cycles are broken. Carl Jung said that the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of the parents. If you don't process your own wounds, your children will carry the weight, not because you want them to, but because the unconscious always overflows into the next generation. Healing isn't just for you, it's for everyone who comes after you. Emily now has a 7-year-old daughter. When the little girl draws, Emily makes a point of looking her in the eyes and saying, "That's beautiful. Tell me about this drawing," without correcting, without improving, without conditioning. Ethan now hugs his grandchildren. He cries in front of them when he's sad. He says, "I love you," without fear of seeming weak. The cycle has been broken. Ashley doesn't have children yet, but if she does, she knows exactly what she won't do, and more importantly, she's doing the internal work necessary so that the complexes don't speak through her when the moment arrives. The recipe can be unlearned, the ingredients can be substituted. The cycle can be interrupted, but only through awareness, only through choice, only through the courage to look at your own shadows and decide that the transmission stops here. You didn't ask to be the product of this recipe, but now that you know what it contains, the responsibility is yours, not for what was done to you, but for what you do with what was done. The child you were cannot be saved retroactively, but the child who exists now, whether it's your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, or the inner child who still lives within you, that child can still be protected. The question is, are you going to continue following the recipe, or are you going to tear up the manual and write a new story? Comment below which of the 5 ingredients you most recognize from your own childhood. And if you're a parent, comment on which ingredient you struggle most not to repeat. These two answers will show you exactly where your work of awareness needs to focus.